we get to create stuff that's never been seen before, like technology that, is not photographable, that, there's no micrographs of, there's no imagery. And so that's exciting, but it really does mean that, you have to come up with like, well, okay, what's the best way to describe this that is still true to the science?
Can you imagine capturing your whole scientific story in one visual? This is some of the work that goes into doing just that. Hey everybody, welcome. We are Nicole and Claire from SayoStudio. We're a science communications agency, and we're here to talk about part of our process today. We're talking about research, our research, which is kind of the foundational piece of our illustration animation process.
Yes, we are excited to be here, excited to be talking to all of you science lovers. Some of you are scientists, some of you are people who just love learning about science. And so, like Claire said, we're excited to talk about research and what that means to us. So sometimes we kind of make assumptions about what it means when we say that one of the things that makes us unique is that we put a lot of time and energy into doing research before pencils hit paper. So it's before we sketch, before we do the artwork. But of course, that's very different from what a scientist is doing when they say research. So we just wanted to talk about that a little bit today.
Yeah.
So,
talk about how it's different. What happens after, an initial meeting where a researcher or scientist breaks down what they've been, putting sometimes years of hard work into, often years of hard work into in the lab. So what happens after we get that story from them and we get, some published papers, we get additional resources, some PowerPoint slides breaking down the science behind what they're discovering. So I think it's interesting because this is kind of a tangent, but Nicole and I often talk about a request that happens in real time of, what is your idea? Like, can you sketch it out for me? What are you thinking? And Nicole and I in those moments always have pause because it takes so much. That process is probably one of the most time consuming in the whole process itself.
Yeah.
We really have to digest and put some work in behind the scenes before we're comfortable introducing an idea.
I like to use the word percolate.
Yeah.
So for those of you who've worked with me, you may have heard me say that before. Like it feels like when we get to first talk to a scientist, an engineer, we're doing a lot of listening, and then it's afterward, like you said, that we really have a chance to go through the notes that we took and compare that to the literature that they may have sent us, and like you said, PowerPoints, and then do our own work. So again, that's kind of what we want to look at more and what that means. And I'd say that, I don't know, what would you say is the kind of average amount of time that you put into research for?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on the project. I think something that's come up recently is kind of overview, figures, even if they're just figures for proposals, but overview, like really big conceptual, like summarizing the big idea of this long, complex research story.
For like a proposal
Yes.
or
Yeah, I think those are often the most time consuming, even though the end product could be something really, visually simple because you want to get that idea across so clearly. But yeah, I would begin at, a couple hours at the minimum.
I was going to say my average is probably 10 hours.
Yeah.
So sometimes if it's a subject that I'm really familiar with, it
Can be quicker.
goes faster. But even then, you're doing a lot of work to try to make sure that you're really making it unique and pinpointing what it is that makes their work unique and how that compares to what else is out there.
Yeah.
So I guess to start, like, our research process, let's talk a little bit about, like, what's the first thing that we're trying to do and look up.
I think the initial thing is always, you know, making sure that foundational knowledge is there. So whatever topic we're starting with, let's say it's, you know, cellular biology, for example. You know, what pathway are we talking about? What kind of is the foundation of this pathway that I need to know the basics about? Refresh my memory, you know, go back to what I learned long ago and make sure that, you know, I'm on the right path as far as just that really foundational scientific knowledge. So I would say that's step one.
And I wanted to point out to our listeners who might not know this, that we get to work, like, I feel like we're so lucky compared to a lot of studios that we get to work on so many different subjects.
So many.
And so, you know, we're going from an astronomy piece on, you know, say black holes one week to, you know, a new drug development looking at, you know, I don't know, drug delivery or something for cancer therapeutics. And so it really varies. So that, I think.
What was the recent aquifer characterization?
Yes.
So, like, just such
different
a range.
scales, different. And so I think, just to get our brain shifted and focused on that specific project. But then, like you said, just refreshing our memory of things that we've learned, and also things change so quickly. Making sure that we're up on the latest information. So I don't know about you, but I feel like as I'm going through the information that the researchers that the scientists have given us, a lot of times it's like even as basic as taking the keywords that they gave us and looking it up, and both looking up the text definitions and seeing if I can understand that in layman's terms in a way that I can translate it, but also seeing what other images are out there.
So from there, from really getting that basic context, you know, what area are we in? And then more specifically, what, you know, then the honing in within that general area of research. And then, I think, like you just mentioned, jumping into what's out there. So kind of the image research.
And I think that's another area that maybe scientists might not think about, is that in addition to actually understanding the science, like, the beauty of it is bringing together the style of the art. And so not only do we want to see what other science images are out there, but seeing how we can bring some flair that brings attention to their science in a new way. So looking up different art inspirations and like even color palette ideas and how that might fit with the branding that they already might have if they're a company or a well-established lab.
And often, you know, depending on where the research leads us as far as concept development. So, you know, what metaphors did the researcher introduce to us that they like to use to explain what they're doing, or what metaphors come to us as we're, you know, doing this background research. And then what do images already exist out there for those metaphors themselves? You know, so often it's not even science art. It's just art or photographs or images or, you know, broad artistic images in general.
And I think that's one thing that I love about the work we do, is that we go from areas where there's a lot of imagery out there, but it might not be that great. So say like a cross-section of a volcano, that there's so many volcanoes out there, but a lot of them are incorrect, and really making sure that we're doing it correctly and adding information that people might not have known that makes it more interesting. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we get to create stuff that's never been seen before, like technology that, you know, is not photographable, that, you know, there's no micrographs of, there's no imagery. And so that's exciting, but it really does mean that, you have to come up with like, well, okay, what's the best way to describe this that is still true to the science? So.
Yeah. And then I think from there, you know, kind of things that feel almost abstract as we're planning a vision. You know, how can we portray, you know, things turning on and off, and how can we portray, you know, switching and, you know, often almost like complex movements within science and change
and time.
And so, you know, you find yourself looking up crazy things like crazy and common, like, you know, motion swooshes through water, or you know, literal switches on and off, like light switches, and how can I use that artistically in this context?
I feel like looking up light switches is, or like stoplights is something that I do a lot to try to see.
And then, or maybe it's just color, or the right glow, or the lack of glow, or so all these things.
And I think that's something too, is as we're, say, reading through a research paper, you know, a lot of times there might be microscopy images that we can get some guidance from. And so say if they're using like, you know, the standard GFP green, like, is that something that we want to use in our image? Or is that distracting and not really suit the overall story? And I think that's something that when we come to the researchers with our ideas, we want to be able to explain that. Like, well, we considered this, but we chose to do this because we think it'll serve you better. And so I think that too is a lot of part of our initial process, is just like in words putting together like, okay, these are the different things we tried, and this is, you know, where we came to because of X, Y, and Z.
So just, you know, with this research is when often a lot of the questions come into play. And so, you know, we'll speak to, and which is, it makes me think again about that request of like, okay, what are your ideas? Like, sketch out what you're thinking. And we don't even have the right questions formed. Because we haven't dove in like we need to. And so, when, you know, with this stage, eventually comes a sketch, and then with that sketch comes often many questions. And, you know, what do you think of this? And I considered this, but I don't think it worked very well. Would you like to see it still?
And that is something that we try to be open with, because sometimes it does lead to other ideas that they might come up with based on kind of the roads that we didn't think were working. Or it might be like, okay, I understand why you went this way, but can you incorporate this one part into it? And I don't know about you, but I feel like I spend so much time on scale. So just trying to figure out the basics of how large is this nanoscale compared to, like, say, a cell? Like, how big is, you know, like, I know some of the basics after working in this for so long. So, like, say a bacterium is around a micron versus, you know, but cell. It's still like, these are things like, okay, I'm pretty sure I got that right. I've got to double check.
And then often, you know, where it makes sense to totally ignore those rules of scale. And often bringing that to the researcher themselves, or the researcher explicitly saying, like, I know this is a lot bigger, but it's not our focus, and it can be shown here very small, and that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's something actually that's been driving me nuts with some of the AI testing that we've been doing, is that like when we play with scale, we do it very purposefully.
Yeah.
So like we definitely have, say, things that we want to be focused on, but are in actuality are very small in the foreground. And AI, like, it just mashes things up all over the place.
So confused.
Like, yeah.
And not just on a microscopic level. Like, because, you know, right now we're talking about microscopic things, which for AI, considering things that aren't photographable, that makes sense. Because there's...
That's true.
So much lack of reference for AI. You know,
it hasn't been fed.
Yeah. But
stuff.
Even when it comes to foreground, even things that aren't microscopic, and it just comes to focus on foreground, and it still messes it up, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
And comforting, because we have not gotten to the place where we feel anywhere remotely close to the fact that AI could do what we do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely true. Yeah.
Can help us in certain aspects.
Yeah.
But.
So I think the one thing that you mentioned before that we could talk about a little bit more is metaphor and how that plays into science illustration. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people think of science illustration as being very dry and diagrammatic.
Yeah.
At least what we get to do a lot of times is very conceptual and editorial, especially for cover art or like kind of feature magazine images. And it can be, it's both the most fun and also the most challenging, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, metaphor is fun. I, as you were talking, I was trying to think, like, what is a recent one that I've really enjoyed? And I'm having a hard time coming up with one. I liked, and maybe it's because I've thought about it a lot and we've produced a lot of content around it. But the, you know, it's a tripwire metaphor for HIV, SIV.
Yeah, and that's actually one that we have a video on that we just recently shared that we're excited for you all to check out.
Yes.
It's a new documentary style format that we did about your process doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So a fun metaphor, and also some new content we have out for that we think serves or can serve researchers and founders themselves for getting their own
the video style
across.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the video style. Yeah. What, Nicole, are some of your, well, I guess what's your least favorite kind of metaphor within science that
my least favorite,
whether it's overused, overdone, or just something that didn't make sense to you?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot. I think even beyond science illustration, just in general, I think that the puzzle metaphor is one that people ask us to do a lot.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to make original. So I'm not going to say I don't like it, but it's definitely a challenge. Which makes sense in science, because a lot of times what you're trying to explain is that things come together and that there's, you know, like, say, many disciplines that come together to create this full picture. So I understand where the metaphor is coming from, but it's used a lot.
Yeah. Like, think
Do
of
you
how
have
many
other ones?
No, I was just thinking, like, think of how many websites you see that have, you know, a puzzle of, like, all the different pieces of their, even not in science, like, pieces of their
I think a lot of nonprofits do that too.
Yeah, it's overdone.
Yeah.
I agree. One of mine? I don't know. That made me, actually, it's funny, because I don't think this is really, I don't know if it'd be considered a metaphor, but that made me think of, you know, in the world of molecular cellular biology, like, how often we're showing, you know, lock and key style pathway, like with proteins and, you
I
know,
actually really like that metaphor.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like the basic.
It's necessary because it's such foundational, you know, biological processes. It's foundational to so many biological processes, but how do you reimagine that and revisualize that over and over and over again to make it unique?
Okay, so I don't know. I'm curious from viewers if anybody leaves comments, like, is something like the lock and key is something that most people know about, or is that terminology and like kind of
that's
a
good
visual
question.
metaphor that you and I are used to because we think about it all the time?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is that something you guys have heard of, lock and key?
I don't know. So, do you want to describe the basics of lock and key, or do you want me to?
You should.
Okay. Well, so basically, you know, on the cellular level, the proteins that make our cells work, that make up our bodies, you know, they're many of the enzymatic processes. It's lock and key. So there's one protein that'll bind to a signal, which would be our hormone or some other molecule, and so it fits only that one signal, right? So it's not going to fit something that doesn't work. And so that's what pretty much all of drug development is about, is trying to find, like, say, a receptor, a protein that is overactive because it keeps wanting to bind these. And so instead we're going to make a drug molecule that fits that pocket well and gets stuck there. Like, that's kind of the basics of
And in that case, inhibits. Yeah. Or we need more activity from this protein. So we're going to create this drug that makes it over.
Yeah, or that can supplement if for some reason you're missing that hormone or that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
metaphors are powerful.
They're powerful. And that is one that, you know, we've rethought many times before. What shapes make sense?
Yeah.
Can we do a cross? Can we do a... Yeah.
I'm trying to what other, like, truly... I'm trying to think of metaphors that we've done before that I really didn't think would work, like that a scientist suggested, and then we ended up with something really interesting. I might have to think on that, and then we can come back to that as a short sometime.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think of the on and off switch metaphor that you did.
Yeah.
Which was difficult.
Yeah. And that one was hard and fun because they really wanted it distilled down to, like, its essence, as simple as possible. And I think that's another misconception, is that when somebody sees a simple graphic and image, they think that it was easy to do or fast. And a lot of times those are the most difficult to, like, start from, like, all the details and take out this and take out that. Okay, does it still tell our story? Yes, but it's still too complicated. Okay, let's take out this detail and this detail.
Yeah. And the number of iterations that came before the final product is absolutely tremendous, absurd.
Yeah, and I think in that process, it's also it's a back and forth where, you know, sometimes it's us pushing them to simplify more, and sometimes it's even the client, because we're in this all the time and we like a lot of the details, and them saying, like, no, we don't need this won't resonate with the patients we're trying to talk to, or the investors that we need to describe this to. So
but clearly this is part of our process that I think we enjoy the most.
It is.
Interestingly enough, I think Nicole and I both get frustrated when we're asked or we find ourselves creating art for the sake of art. I think there's specific times when that's fun.
Which isn't to be said that, like, what we create can't be art, but if we're not asked to, like, truly understand the science mechanism behind it.
And just add depth and be able to look at a final product and know that the story behind it, you know, can go on and on and on as much as you want to dive into it. I think that's something, for me personally, that is so rewarding and makes what we do never dull. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the other thing, unless you have more you want to talk about here, is as we're thinking about working with researchers and scientists, I'm really excited about what we've been brainstorming, which is to start actually talking to the scientists we've worked with in our podcast. And so I think we're both excited if you've all worked with us, to let us know if that would be interesting to you to, have a conversation with us.
Yeah.
But also beyond that, if you're a listener, we'd love to hear if that's something that you'd like. And and I think you were saying that part of that is just helping share their excitement. Like we love hearing how excited the scientists that come to us are, and being able to share that. I mean, I hope that we do it in our artwork, but it's also different hearing it from it is the mouths of the person who's spent their life working on it. So
yeah, and just being able to share that with our viewers and the world, like how this process works in real time, I guess. From the researchers sharing what they've dedicated their lives to often, to how we digest all of that information and turn it into a visual, and how that visual worked for the researcher, and how it could have been leveraged in a bigger way, or how maybe they made use of it in ways that were surprising.
Yeah. And I feel like that's been a shift for us that I'm excited to continue following and share with all of you, is just following up with the people that we've done this work for to really see how it impacted their work to get their messaging out there. Yeah. And if there's ways that we can improve and like help them more to get their science in front of more people. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Did it bring up more questions? Did it change how, their science was shared? Or, I don't know. Yeah. There's so many follow-up questions that we've thought of.
Yeah.
As we hope to ultimately, have the biggest impact, like that ideal, this image allowed me to share what I do in a way that I hadn't anticipated, and I could put it here and here, and it made people ask these questions.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I think that's kind of the dream of a lot of people in our field, is not only sharing the science, but how exciting would that be to know that our work helped say bridge the gap of two collaborators, that I didn't realize this was the aspect, and I now see your work and I want to collaborate, and it takes off in a new direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And how realistic that is.
Yeah.
How many cases that, how many times that's happened? Is that happening?
Yeah. I mean, and then on the other side of things, you just, if they were able to explain it to their family in a way that they never would before, that's incredible.
Or their
too.
child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or inspire a new, the next generation of scientists and students. And
exactly.
I know we have grand aspirations.
Yeah, we do.
But
we do.
Yeah.
But I think
it's important though.
Often the why behind, what we do as a whole. And so I think we could go on and on and on about this portion of our process.
Could.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, me too.
And everything that we're doing on ScienceStudio Science, we'd love to hear from all of you to, if you enjoyed this. And we will never say no to your likes. That always helps us a ton. And if you're interested, please subscribe.
And we'll be back with more, hopefully with some researchers on board who are excited to talk through their science with us live.
Thank you so much, everybody.